The Binh Gia hamlet was a refuge for 6,000 Catholics, relocated to South Vietnam from the Communist North. But in December 1964, the war would explode around its Catholic church, as Saigon Strategic Reserve battled Hanoi's huge winter-spring offensive. This channel's mission is to challenge the Vietnam orthodoxy. Much of what you know about the Vietnam War is either incomplete or false. Please consider supporting this channel and its mission through Patreon. The link is in the description. Binh Gia was a village in Giat Zo district, Phuoc Tuy province, 67 kilometers from Saigon. 6,000 people lived in Binh Gia, anti-communist Catholic refugees from Hanoi, North Vietnam, relocated to the south under Operation Passage to Freedom following the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The village was situated on a vantage point in a lowland forest. 400 meters wide and 1 kilometer long, a road ran through Binh Gia and a Catholic church stood in its centre. The area around the village had been cleared to counter approaches to the barbed wire perimeter fence, which was protected by thorn bush obstacles, minefields and booby traps, and in late 1964, Binh Gia was one of the few strategic hamlets that still had an effective militia. But Hanoi had planned an offensive that would test these defences to their breaking point, and the main force regiments earmarked to strike the first blow at Binh Gia were already moving into their assembly areas. On October 11, 1964, Communist forces operating in South Vietnam were ordered by the Central Military Commission and ARVN High Command to conduct a series of offensives during winter and spring 1965. Senior General Nguyen Chi Hang, a member of the Politburo of the Party Central Committee and Deputy Secretary of the Central Military Party Committee, was appointed Commander of Military Operations in the South, and a number of high-level cadre with experience in expanding main force units and leading massed combat operations were also sent south to supervise preparations, which began in November. The three fronts selected were Eastern Nam Bo, Central Chung Bo, and Tai Nguyen in the Central Highlands. The first complete North Vietnamese unit to be sent south, the 95th Regiment, was also dispatched in October. Although Hanoi and the NLF publicly declared their desire to achieve reunification peacefully, in a top-secret letter dated November 19th, the Soviet ambassador reported to Moscow that Hanoi was expanding military operations in the south to improve its position, and according to the ambassador, Hanoi expected the support of Beijing, with Moscow obliged to do the same. COSFN main force units would target the Ba Gia, Long Hain and Bin Long, Phuoc Long areas along Route 14. The Nam Bo Regional Command, led by Chan Ding Zhu and his deputy Nguyen Hua and political commissar Lê Van Tuong, was established and began urgent preparations for the offensive. It had the mission of destroying parts of the enemy forces and strategic hamlets, with the aim of connecting bases in eastern Vietnam and Military Region 6. With that achieved, movement of Communist main forces and the transportation of equipment and supplies by land and sea could be better protected. The 1st and 2nd Infantry Regiments had overrun the strategic hamlets at San Sang, Cam Se, Dong Sa and Tai Kai in Binh Duong, Bin Long and Phuoc Long provinces during July, and between August and September they had executed deep thrusts into Binh Duong and Chua Tang, ambushing 2 ARVN companies on Route 14 and destroying 5 armoured vehicles, M24 Chaffee light tanks and M113 APCs. The units regrouped for the next offensive in the Long Hain area, the 2 regiments and a number of fire support battalions arriving in War Zone D, the Phuoc Tang area northeast of Saigon, where they were given tactical and technical training. To study the situation and prepare the battlefield, a number of cadre groups were sent to Ba Gia and Long Hain provinces, and to the southern districts of Binh Tuan. Many problems were encountered in preparing supplies for the campaign. The areas were far from the COSFN base area and close to Saigon, which controlled the strategic road network. And as almost 10,000 troops would take part in the campaign, a large amount of food and ammunition was required. Kosvan Rear Services groups worked to transport weapons, ammunition and food from Kosvan bases to the campaign assembly area. Groups K10 and 1500 built piers at Phuc Chi and Luc An to receive weapons sent by sea from North Vietnam, and by January 1965, Maritime Group 125 had delivered 50 tons of weapons to Khao Mau, Ben Che, Ba Zia and Phuc Yen. In early November, the 1st and 2nd Infantry Regiments, the 80th Artillery Group, and a number of support units crossed the Dong Nai River. Following different routes, all units arrived in their assembly areas in the Long Hain area on November 20th. Also participating in the campaign were 3 main force battalions, the 186th from Military Region 6 and the 500th and 800th from Region 7, as well as the 445th Local Force Company from Ba Zia Province and a local force platoon from Hai Duc District in Binh Tuan Province. A total of 500 tons of weapons had been delivered to the attackers before the start of the operation, equipping the infantry with AK-47s and machine guns. The 80th Artillery Group was also supplied with a large number of heavy weapons, including mortars, recoilless rifles, howitzers, and heavy anti-aircraft machine guns. While Kosvan Artillery shelled the Luc Tang District Military Headquarters, the 445th attacked Binh Gia on December 2nd. The attack failed in the face of a strong counter-attack, but with pressure growing against the strategic hamlet, on December 9th the 3rd Armoured Troop of the 1st Armoured Regiment was dispatched up Route 2 to relieve the village. The 2nd Regiment moved out from Ney Mountain, 8 kilometres from the road, arriving just in time to annihilate the armoured unit, destroying 14 M113s. Providing a timely infusion to units participating in the campaign, on the night of December 22nd, an ocean-going vessel delivered 44 tons of weapons from North Vietnam to Luc An. After 2 weeks of rest and recuperation at Vung Tau, the ARVN 4th Marine Battalion was transferred to Xi'an in Ben Hoa Province to serve as the 3rd Corps Rapid Reaction Reserve Force. Major Nguyen Van Nho had been appointed commander of the 4th Marine Battalion in mid-1964. At Xi'an Base, the US Marine Advisory Group sent Major Ella to act as unit senior advisor, assisted by First Lieutenant Brady, a recent graduate from the Marine Corps Basic School in Quantico, Virginia. Although standing duty as the Rapid Reaction Force, the battalion commander allowed a number of officers, NCOs and enlisted men to take annual leave and visit Tu Duc and Saigon. The following day the battalion received orders to move out immediately for Binh Gia in the Ba Zia area. An armoured troop had been ambushed on Inter-Provincial Route 15 between Phuc Tuy and Long Hain, and the battalion was to conduct a counter-attack, clearing the road to the district headquarters. The 4th Marine Battalion was airlifted to Bai Loi, the first lift in the early morning, the last just before dark, with 1 company transported in each lift. The battalion then advanced towards Binh Ba, the residents of the Binh Gia hamlet, lighting torches and lanterns to light the road, and greeting the men with cakes and candy. After passing through the hamlet in the darkness, the battalion reached the Inter-Provincial Road and turned towards the Phuc Tuy province capital, moving for an hour through the abandoned Quang Zhao rubber plantation as it spread out on both sides of the road. The battalion commander then decided to deploy for the night in the middle of the plantation. At dawn the battalion continued its advance for several kilometres until it located the site of the ambush. The Marines discovered direct APCs and the bodies of the ARVN soldiers. The 113s had been destroyed by mines, and the VC had removed weapons from the wrecks and stripped the dead soldiers of their clothing, boots and weapons. The bodies were recovered and taken back to the road to be picked up and taken to Phuc Tuy. At noon the battalion resumed its advance towards Phuc Tuy along Route 15. The following day it received orders to clear a route north of Route 4 from Phuc Tuy to Long Tang, which it did without contact with the enemy, and at Long Tang it was ordered to sweep south all the way to the flooded Zung Sat forest, where it was engaged in small, scattered firefights. The next day, GMC trucks transported the battalion back to Xi'an, where each day it sent one company to Bien Hoa Air Base to stand alert as the 3rd Corps Rapid Reaction Force. During the early morning hours of December 28th, the 445th, reinforced with an infantry company from the 1st Regiment, penetrated the eastern perimeter of the Binh Gia defences, using overwhelming firepower to drive the 65 Popular Force militiamen into underground bunkers, where they requested help and continued to supply information during the occupation by radio. Colonel Ta Min Kam, the Viet Cong regimental commander, established his command post in the village church and waited for reinforcement with heavy mortars, machine guns and recoilless rifles, while a network of defensive positions was created around the village, with bunkers and trenches protected by mines and barbed wire. Artillery units continued to shell the Luk Tang District Military Headquarters with 75mm recoilless rifles and 82mm mortars. The local Catholic priest, who was also the village chief, then dispatched a bicycle messenger to Ba Zia District Headquarters to request a relief force. On December 29th, 2 companies from the 30th Ranger Battalion were airlifted by the US 118th Aviation Company to the west of Binh Gia, with orders to retake the village. The companies advanced on the hamlet, supported by A-1 Sky Raiders and UH-1B gunships, but were too weak to penetrate the densely defended communist positions. The whole battalion was then committed, but the Rangers made no more progress. Attacking out of the afternoon sunlight, they suffered heavy losses, with the battalion commander and his American advisor severely wounded, and the battalion was stopped at the western end of the village. 2 companies from the 33rd Ranger Battalion were airlifted northeast of Binh Gia and marched forward to assault the hamlet. 1 company reached the outskirts of the village but failed to breach the defences. The second attempted to outflank the fortified positions through a coffee plantation, but its movement was tracked by Ta Min Kam, and he ordered his battalions to push into the plantation from the north, south and west, driving the Rangers east into a flat, open killing zone within short range of concealed heavy weapons. When the VC stormed into the coffee plantation at 3 PM, some of the Rangers fled to the east, where they were decimated by heavy weapons fire. Others tried to fight their way northwest into the centre of the hamlet, but were stopped by a blocking force, and surrounded and outnumbered, they were quickly overcome. Of all the Rangers that had been sent into the fight on the 29th, 70% had become casualties. The residents helped the Rangers, cutting VC phone lines, sheltering the wounded, and retrieving weapons and ammunition from the dead. The next day, December 30th, the 38th Ranger Battalion was lifted unopposed into an open field southwest of Binh Gia, and immediately advanced on the village. However, they failed to break through to link up with the 100 survivors of the 33rd Ranger Battalion taking refuge in the church, and fell back after calling in mortar fire to decimate the VC manoeuvring to encircle them. In the morning, the 4th Marine Battalion, the last 3rd Corps Reserve, was airlifted from Bien Hoa Air Base to the northwest outskirts of Binh Gia. Again, there were only enough helicopters to lift 1 company at a time, the flight from Bien Hoa taking 1 hour. 1-4, commanded by First Lieutenant Chan Nuk Tuan, was the first company to land, with orders to secure the landing zone. When the battalion headquarters landed, Major Nyo sent the Assistant Battalion Advisor, First Lieutenant Phil Brady, forward to assist 1-4, with orders for the company to take the objective. The battalion then began its advance to the church, and 1.5 hours later it linked up with the Rangers of the 30th, 33rd and 38th Battalions, the VC having withdrawn to the northeast, where they could strike relief forces. That afternoon the Marine Battalion and the Rangers secured the village, to the cheers of the local residents. the Catholic priest asking the residents to roast a cow in celebration and to feed the Marines and Rangers. That evening the VC attacked the village from the southeast, but the villagers alerted the ARVN soldiers, who stopped the VC with support from helicopter gunships from the US 68th Assault Helicopter Company, based at Vung Tau Air Base, and directed by Major Eller, the battalion's senior advisor. However, one gunship was shot down while pursuing the VC, crashing in the rubber plantation near Suan Son hamlet, 4 kilometers from Binh Gia. The 4 crewmen were killed, and 3 Corps ordered the 4th Marine Battalion to locate the crashed helicopter and recover the bodies of the crew. The priest had told the battalion that the VC unit was regimental sized, but against the advice of his American advisor, the battalion commander, Major General Nguyen Van Nho, ordered 2-4, commanded by First Lieutenant Zo Hu Tuong, to the rubber plantation. An hour later, 2-4 had advanced 2 kilometers through the abandoned plantation, over low hills covered with sparse jungle and rows of trees, and reported finding the wreckage. The bodies of the 4 Americans had been buried by the VC, and after reporting the discovery over the Prick 10 radio network, the Marines began to dig the bodies up. However, the VC 1st Regiment had been watching 2-4 since they began their approach to the plantation, and after an artillery barrage, the 2nd Battalion launched a frontal assault, while the 3rd Battalion manoeuvred to the rear of the Marines. Heavy machine guns and recoilless rifles fired directly into the Marine positions, and the rattle of submachine guns mixed with exploding grenades. 2-4 desperately threw back their attackers, but beyond the range of the 105mm howitzers located at Phuc Tuy and Ba Zia, it seemed doubtful they could hold their position for much longer. Then, guided by smoke dropped from an L-19 Bird Dog, American tactical air support aircraft hammered the communist positions, forcing them to pull back and allowing 2-4 to withdraw from the plantation. The 1-4 commander, after meeting 4-4 commander First Lieutenant Nguyen Zhang Tong, a classmate from the military academy, immediately led the 2 companies forward, spread out on both sides of the gravel road from Binh Gia to Quang Zhao, with 3-4 led by 2nd Lieutenant Chin Van Hui, a graduate of Military Academy Class 17, serving as battalion reserve. As 1-4 moved towards the plantation, it encountered a number of Marines from 2-4, who volunteered to lead 1-4 to the battle site. First Lieutenant Tung informed 1-4 that the VC force was very large, and a number were wearing NVA uniforms. The 2 columns advanced cautiously, spotting only a few VC soldiers in the abandoned plantation, hidden by tall grass as high as a man's chest. Encountering no opposition, the Marines reached the centre of the plantation at 2 p.m. The bodies of a platoon commanded by 2nd Lieutenant Nguyen Van Hung, a recent graduate from the Military Academy's Class 19, were lined up where they had fallen, and close to them was the wreck of the downed helicopter. At 3 p.m, the Marines loaded the bodies of the Americans onto a helicopter at a nearby landing zone, and an hour later, Major Nguyen Van Nho ordered his battalion to carry their casualties back to the village, rather than wait for another helicopter. But as the Marines began to move, 3 VC battalions with artillery support attacked from separate directions. In the opening moments, the battalion commander and battalion surgeon were shot dead, the executive officer suffered a mortal wound, and when they requested air support, the Marines were informed that none was available. 2 companies fought their way back to Binh Gia along the gravel road. Another was eventually overrun and decimated in the plantation, while the 4th held out on a hilltop inside the plantation against numerous VC artillery barrages and infantry assaults, slipping through VC lines and back to Binh Gia at sundown. The 4th Marine Battalion, with a strength of 426 men, had lost 117 killed, 71 wounded, with 13 men missing. 35 officers had been killed, and the battalion's 4 American advisors had been wounded. 3 ARVN airborne battalions arrived the following day, January 1st, but most of the VC had already withdrawn. 2 days later, a task force of rangers and armour, searching for the withdrawing VC several kilometres southwest of the hamlet, ran into the 2nd Regiment. The South Vietnamese tanks and APCs exchanged fire with the Viet Cong, the task force suffering nearly 100 casualties, recoilless rifle fire destroying 1 tank and 2 M113s, while VC casualties are unknown. The Viet Cong then withdrew completely from the Binh Gia area. To recognise its performance in the battle, after the campaign the 1st Regiment was given the honorary title, the Binh Gia Regiment. The South Vietnamese had suffered severe casualties, most of them elite rangers or marines. The losses sustained by the Communists are unknown, but their withdrawal from the battlefield suggests a lack of strength to remain and exploit their success. Le Duan later explained that the Communists withdrew because the North lacked the strategic reserve forces to decisively defeat the South Vietnamese at Binh Gia. The North had not reached the point that the large and decisive battles Le Duan and General Nguyen Chi Thanh had hoped would develop. General Hoang Van Thai remarked that our armed forces were still small, and we lacked the main force fists needed to take action 1 step ahead of the general uprising. But those main force fists were on their way down the Ho Chi Minh Trail.